At first, nothing in his life looked wrong. In fact, from the outside, everything seemed perfectly fine. He woke up at the same time every morning, followed the same routine, met the same people, and ended each day with the quiet comfort of familiarity. There were no major struggles, no dramatic failures, and no obvious risks. People around him often said he was lucky, stable job, predictable income, peaceful life. And for a long time, he believed them. Comfort felt like success because society had taught him that stability was the ultimate goal. But slowly, almost invisibly, something began to change inside him. It wasn't loud enough to alarm him at first. It felt more like a whisper than a warning, a small sense of restlessness that appeared during quiet moments. Sometimes it came late at night, when distractions faded. Sometimes it appeared when he saw someone pursuing a passion with energy he no longer felt. He would quickly ignore it, convincing himself that dissatisfaction was normal, that adulthood simply meant settling down and being realistic. Days turned into months, and months quietly became years. His routine grew stronger, tighter, more automatic. Decisions required less thinking because everything was already decided for him. While this made life easier, it also made it smaller. The excitement he once felt about possibilities slowly disappeared. Dreams he used to talk about became jokes he told about his younger self. He stopped asking what if, and started saying maybe someday, even though deep down he knew someday never arrived on its own. The strange thing about comfort is that it rarely feels dangerous. Unlike failure or hardship, comfort doesn't hurt immediately. It wraps itself around you gently, convincing you that staying the same is safe. Every small compromise feels reasonable. Every postponed goal feels justified. He told himself he would take risks later, when the timing was better, when he felt more confident, when circumstances were perfect. But perfection never came, and the waiting quietly became a habit. Without realizing it, he had built an invisible wall around his life. There were no physical barriers, no locked doors, no one forcing him to stay where he was. The wall existed only in his thinking, made from fear disguised as logic. He avoided challenges because they felt uncomfortable. He avoided new opportunities because they carried uncertainty. Each avoided risk added another brick to that unseen barrier. What made the wall truly powerful was how normal it felt. Everyone around him lived similar lives, followed similar routines, and shared similar complaints. This normalcy reassured him that nothing was wrong. If everyone else was doing the same thing, then surely he was on the right path. Yet comparison became another trap. Instead of measuring himself against his potential, he measured himself against convenience. Over time, he noticed something even more unsettling. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't growing either. His skills stayed the same. His ambitions shrank to match his comfort. Opportunities passed by not because he couldn't take them, but because he no longer believed he should. The person he once imagined becoming began to feel like a stranger. There were moments when motivation briefly returned, a burst of inspiration after watching a success story or hearing a powerful idea. For a few hours, sometimes a few days, he felt ready to change everything. But comfort always pulled him back. The routine welcomed him like an old friend, reminding him how easy it was to stay where he was. Slowly, he began to fear effort more than regret, and that was when the invisible wall became strongest. The real danger wasn't that his life was bad, it was that it was just good enough to keep him from chasing something greater. Comfort removed urgency. Without urgency, dreams lost their energy. Without energy, action never began. He told himself he was being patient, but patience without progress quietly turns into stagnation. Deep inside, he sensed that he was capable of more. Sometimes he imagined a different version of himself, one who took risks, learned new things, and stepped into uncertainty with courage. But imagining felt safer than acting. And every day he chose safety. The distance between who he was and who he could become grew wider. The invisible wall didn't appear overnight. It was built slowly through repeated choices to avoid discomfort. Each time he chose familiarity over growth, the wall became harder to see and harder to question. Eventually, he stopped noticing it altogether. Life felt predictable, manageable, and controlled, yet strangely empty. What he didn't realize at the time was that comfort had quietly changed his relationship with fear. Instead of fearing a life without purpose, he began fearing change itself. The unknown looked threatening, while the known felt secure, even if it limited him. And so he stayed, convincing himself that someday he would finally step beyond his routine. But somewhere beneath the calm surface, a truth was waiting to be acknowledged. Comfort was not protecting his dreams. It was slowly replacing them. And although he couldn't yet see how to escape, the first crack in the invisible wall had already formed. The growing awareness that staying the same was costing him more than trying and failing ever could. For a long time, he managed to ignore the quiet discomfort living inside him. Life continued as usual, predictable and controlled, and he convinced himself that stability was enough. But realization rarely arrives as a dramatic explosion. More often, it begins with small moments that refuse to leave your mind. For him, it started on an ordinary day that looked no different from the thousands before it. He was scrolling through his phone during a break, passing time the way he always did, when he came across an old photo of himself. It was taken years earlier, a younger version of him smiling with confidence, surrounded by plans, ambitions, and ideas he once believed were inevitable. He paused longer than expected. Something about that image felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. It wasn't nostalgia that struck him. It was recognition mixed with confusion. He realized he no longer recognized the person he used to be. That moment stayed with him throughout the day. He began noticing things he had ignored before. Conversations felt repetitive. Work felt mechanical. Even laughter felt automatic, as if he were playing a role rather than living fully inside his own life. Nothing was necessarily wrong, yet nothing felt deeply right either. For the first time, he allowed himself to ask a question he had avoided for years. Am I actually moving forward? The answer didn't come immediately, but the question itself changed something. Once asked honestly, it became impossible to silence. He started comparing where he thought he would be by this stage of life with where he actually stood. The gap between expectation and reality was not caused by failure. It was caused by hesitation. He hadn't lost his dreams in a single moment. He had slowly postponed them until they faded into the background. Soon after, another realization hit him even harder. He noticed people around him growing, learning, taking risks, and evolving. Some succeeded, some failed, but all of them were moving. Meanwhile, his own life felt paused. Watching others advance didn't make him jealous. It made him aware. He began to understand that time moves forward whether you act or not. Standing still was not neutral, it was a decision. That awareness brought discomfort he could no longer escape. At night, when everything became quiet, thoughts he once ignored grew louder. He started replaying missed opportunities in his mind. Chances he had avoided because they felt uncertain, ideas he abandoned because they required effort, goals he delayed because comfort felt easier. Each memory revealed the same pattern, fear disguised as practicality. He realized he had been telling himself convincing stories. He said he was waiting for the right moment, but the truth was he was waiting to feel ready. And readiness, he now understood, rarely comes before action. By waiting for confidence, he had unknowingly trained himself to avoid growth. The most painful part of realization wasn't regret, it was clarity. He could no longer blame circumstances, luck, or other people. The invisible wall around his life had not been built by external limitations. It had been built by his own choices, small decisions repeated daily. This understanding was uncomfortable, but it was also strangely empowering. If he had created the wall, maybe he could also dismantle it. As days passed, he became more aware of how often fear influenced his decisions. He noticed how quickly he rejected new ideas with excuses that sounded logical but felt hollow. He saw how routine had slowly replaced curiosity. Even simple changes felt intimidating because they disrupted the sense of control he had grown dependent on. One evening, while sitting alone, he experienced a thought that changed everything. What scared him most was no longer failure, but the idea of living the same year over and over again. For the first time, the pain of staying the same felt heavier than the fear of change. That emotional shift marked the true turning point. He began to understand that comfort had not been peaceful, it had been numbing. It protected him from risk, but it also protected him from growth, excitement, and meaning. The realization didn't instantly make him brave or confident. Instead, it made him honest. And honesty forced him to confront a truth he had avoided. Potential means nothing without action. With this awareness came mixed emotions. There was regret for lost time, but also hope that change was still possible. He realized that the invisible wall was only powerful because he had never questioned it. The moment he saw it clearly, it lost part of its control. He started paying attention to small feelings he once ignored: curiosity, ambition, even discomfort. Instead of pushing them away, he allowed himself to sit with them. He noticed that discomfort wasn't an enemy. It was a signal pointing toward growth. The same feelings he once avoided were now guiding him towards something new. This realization didn't instantly transform his life, but it changed his direction. He stopped pretending he was satisfied and admitted that he wanted more. More challenge, more meaning, more progress. That admission alone felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. For the first time in years, he felt awake. Not comfortable, not certain, but aware. And awareness became the crack that weakened the invisible wall. He understood that change wouldn't happen overnight, and fear wouldn't disappear instantly. But now he could see the truth clearly. Comfort had been quietly stealing time he could never get back. And once a person truly sees that truth, returning to unconscious comfort becomes impossible. The realization had done its work. The wall was no longer invisible, and knowing it existed meant he could finally begin searching for a way through it. Awareness changed the way he saw his life, but awareness alone did not change his circumstances. The invisible wall was no longer hidden, yet it still stood in front of him, just as strong as before. Knowing he needed to change, and actually changing were two very different battles. For the first time, he understood that breaking free from comfort would not feel inspiring or heroic in the beginning. It would feel uncomfortable, uncertain, and deeply unfamiliar. The first step he took was surprisingly small. There was no dramatic decision, no overnight transformation. Instead, he chose to do one thing differently, something he had been postponing for months because it intimidated him. His hands hesitated, his mind filled with doubts, and every instinct told him to return to what felt safe. But he moved forward anyway. That moment wasn't about success. It was about defiance against the version of himself that always avoided discomfort. Almost immediately, resistance appeared. Fear grew louder, whispering questions designed to stop him. What if you fail? What if people judge you? What if you realize you're not capable after all? These thoughts felt convincing because they sounded logical. For years, he had listened to them without questioning. Now, he began to notice something important. Fear always spoke before action, never after growth. Each small step outside his routine felt exhausting at first. Trying new things required energy he wasn't used to spending. Learning unfamiliar skills made him feel like a beginner again, and that bruised his ego. He had grown comfortable being competent in familiar environments, and now he was choosing situations where he didn't immediately excel. It was frustrating, sometimes even embarrassing, but slowly he started understanding that discomfort was proof of movement. There were days when he wanted to quit. Some attempts didn't go well. Plans failed. Efforts felt unnoticed. Progress seemed painfully slow compared to the expectations he had built in his mind. During those moments, the comfort zone called him back, offering relief and certainty. Returning would have been easy. No one was forcing him to continue. But something inside him had shifted. He now recognized comfort as a trap rather than a reward. He began focusing less on outcomes and more on actions. Instead of asking whether he was succeeding, he asked whether he was growing. That simple change reduced the pressure he placed on himself. Every attempt became valuable, even when imperfect. Every challenge became practice rather than proof of inadequacy. Gradually, he noticed subtle changes. Fear didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling his decisions. Situations that once felt overwhelming became manageable through repetition. Confidence didn't arrive suddenly. It accumulated quietly through consistent effort. The invisible wall, once solid and immovable, started showing cracks he could finally see. One of the hardest parts was facing rejection. Whether it came from others or from his own expectations, rejection forced him to confront vulnerability. In the past, he avoided situations where rejection was possible because it threatened his sense of security. Now he realized rejection was not evidence of failure. It was evidence of participation. For the first time, he was actively engaging with life rather than observing it from a safe distance. He also learned that growth required letting go of certain habits and mindsets. Some routines that once felt comforting now felt limiting. Some conversations drained his motivation instead of supporting it. He became more intentional about where he invested his time and attention. This wasn't about becoming perfect, it was about becoming conscious. There were moments of doubt when progress felt invisible. He questioned whether all this effort would truly lead somewhere meaningful. But then he noticed something subtle yet powerful. He felt more alive. Even on difficult days, there was a sense of purpose that had been missing before. Challenges brought energy instead of exhaustion because they carried meaning. The invisible wall didn't collapse in a single dramatic moment. It weakened gradually with every action taken despite fear. Each time he chose growth over comfort, another brick loosened. The process taught him patience. Real change wasn't loud or immediate. It was built through repeated courage in ordinary moments. He started celebrating small victories, not achievements others would notice, but personal milestones. Speaking up when he once stayed silent. Trying again after disappointment. Continuing even when motivation faded. These moments proved to him that transformation wasn't about becoming someone entirely new. It was about reclaiming parts of himself he had neglected. As weeks turned into months, the unfamiliar slowly became familiar. Challenges that once terrified him turned into opportunities he actively sought. The comfort zone no longer felt like home. It felt like a place he had outgrown. He realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward while fear walked beside him. Most importantly, he stopped waiting to feel ready. Action came first, confidence followed later. This reversed everything he once believed about change. The invisible wall had survived for so long because he thought strength was required before taking action. Now he understood that strength was created through action itself. Looking back, he saw that breaking the wall was not a single decision, but a series of small, consistent choices. Each step outside comfort expanded his world a little more. The life that once felt predictable and confined began opening into possibilities he had forgotten existed. And although the journey was far from finished, one truth became clear. The wall that once defined his limits had never been permanent. It only existed as long as he refused to challenge it. The moment he started moving, even imperfectly, the path beyond comfort began to reveal itself, leading him closer to a version of life that felt uncertain, demanding, and finally, truly alive. At first, the changes were so subtle that he almost didn't notice them. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, and success didn't arrive overnight. In fact, many parts of his journey still felt uncertain. But something inside him had fundamentally shifted. The world no longer looked small or repetitive. Each day carried a sense of possibility that had been missing for years. He realized that stepping beyond comfort had not removed fear from his life. It had changed his relationship with it. Where fear once stopped him, it now guided him. When something made him nervous, he began to see it as a sign pointing toward growth rather than danger. This mindset didn't make challenges easier, but it made them meaningful. He no longer asked, "What if this goes wrong?" Instead, he found himself wondering, "What might I become if I try?" Opportunities started appearing in places he previously overlooked. The truth was, they had always existed. He simply hadn't been ready to see them. Now that he was taking action, people responded differently to him. Conversations became deeper. New connections formed naturally. Confidence slowly replaced hesitation, not because he believed he was guaranteed success, but because he trusted his ability to adapt and learn. One of the biggest surprises was how his self-image began to change. For years, he had quietly labeled himself